Hey everyone, and welcome back. I am joined today by Holly Grigg Spall, who is the author of Sweetening the Pill, one of the OGs on the birth control scene. And we're going to have a really exciting conversation today about some things that you probably have never thought of regarding hormonal birth control. So thanks so much for being here today. I appreciate you joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely. So, first thing is, help us get to know you. What is your story and what was the evolution in terms of how you've arrived at where you are today and the work that you're doing?
So, my story in terms of speaking about the pill started almost exactly 10 years ago. And I was a journalist working like arts and culture journalist, really. And I had been on the pill for about 8 years, and I switched to a very popular pill at the time that everybody was on, my best friend, my sisters, everybody, which was called Yaz or Yasmin in England. And I had a really terrible experience on that pill, especially in terms of the mental health side effects. And they were very insidious and built up over about a course of 1.5, 2 years. And I didn't make the connection that it was the pill that was causing me the issues that I had until I started digging around and doing my own research. And this was pre-Facebook groups, which are marvelous now. And it was, I found an online forum called Yaz and Yasmin Survivors Forum. And it, a lot of the women, as well as some really serious physical issues, it described very similarly to my experience the mental health issues that I was having, which were all kind of under the banner of subclinical depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, panic attacks. And I made that connection. And as a journalist, I then made a real shift in what I really wanted to write about. And I pitched an idea to Easy Living magazine, which was a Condé Nast magazine that isn't around anymore, as far as I know. And the editor there was really interested in an article about the side effects of the pill that you may have not heard about, was the idea. And for that, I did a lot of interviews, and that's really where this all started. So I interviewed a lot of like research scientists from the Kinsey Institute, women themselves who had experienced the same things as me. And I wrote this article, and that became a jumping off point for a blog, which was called Sweetening the Pill. And it had a subtitle of Who Am I When I'm Not on the Pill? And no, 10 years ago, that's what you do. You start a blog, right, with all your research. These days, you probably do a podcast. And so I started a blog, and I wrote that blog over several years. It gained some interest and attention. I got asked to write articles for newspapers and magazines, and asked for my opinions on things that were coming up in the space around like I think it was the 50-year anniversary of the pill, access issues in the US, that kind of thing. And then from there, it became a book proposal, and it became a book because I just realized through that attention, as well as through the comments and emails that were coming at me from women who were like, this is me too, I've experienced this as well, that I, was a wider thing. And I couldn't find a book out there that talked about it. In fact, it was really conspicuously absent from a lot of books that I expected it to be discussed in. And so that book proposal got taken up and the book was published in late 2013. And then in early 2014, I found myself at Ricki Lake's kitchen table, pitching to her and Abby Epstein, her filmmaking partner, for about 3 hours to make their next project be inspired by my book and be about the side effects of the pill. And what we talk about is like all the years in which you are trying to not get pregnant. Because of course they've made this wonderful film, The Business of Being Born, about getting pregnant, being pregnant birth. And so that really, then my book got optioned by them for that. And that's, now coming up to 5 years ago. And so at this point, I still find myself talking a lot about it because it's really still, so prevalent. Unfortunately, I would say things haven't changed an awful lot. I think the conversation has changed, but not enough that, I could ever say like, oh, job's done, put that aside now. And so, in recent years, I've done more kind of workshops and speaking engagements as I've got over my fear of public speaking. And I've still consistently been really involved in the production side of the film in terms of like working with them on interviews and things like that. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at now. It all came out of my personal experience. I had no health background or science background. I always joke, I think I got a C in my GCSE science. It was pretty bad. And I just really pieced it all together myself. And the book's really kind of a memoir, but it's also all kind talking about, you know, why that conversation was absent in all the books I was reading, and why it felt necessary to kind of bring it back into the discussion of women's health, but also feminism and women's progress and things like that.
And this is I think you hit the nail on the head. It's been like the thing that we're not supposed to talk about. Like, we're supposed to say, thank you, and can I have some more, and not question what is actually going on with birth control. And so I've seen the same thing where there's a lot of women's health books out there, but nobody actually addressed the issue of birth control, or the autoimmune books that are out there, the cardiovascular books that are out there. And nobody really looks at the piece of like, and yet we've been taking this medication for decades and we don't really know what it's doing in our body. And it's funny. So I was on Yaz as well at one point in my life. And I remember being like on the treadmill in the gym in my 20s, taking Yaz and reading like Cosmo or some magazine. There it was, like, Yaz was my savior, and feeling like really like reading that and the way I was being advertised to, like I was doing a really good job with my body. Like I was on my game, and I was just, you know, this pinnacle in this picture of like an empowered female. And that's something that you really dive into like no other book has. And I think because you're a journalist, like nobody really can do it the way that you've had, talking about how we've been marketed to and all of this. And so I'd love you to talk a little bit about that, about like what happened that we began to shift our mindset from being like, this is a way to space pregnancies and to delay pregnancy, to like, this is like the end all be all of everything women's health.
Yeah, so Yaz was a really special case, and really, you know, obviously it all started for me with my personal experience with Yaz, but it's interesting that it was that pill because it was marketed so aggressively. One of the first pieces I ever got published was for Ms. Magazine, which was about Yaz and the serious side effects, the increased risk of blood clots, strokes, heart attacks, things like that, and how that was handled by the FDA, how their advertising was incredibly aggressive, and how they had warnings from the FDA for the advertising that they were doing. They had to put out retraction campaigns. I mean, if you really dig back in your memory, you'll probably remember seeing some of them. What was interesting to me is when I was on this pill, it kind of crossed over between a time when I was in England and I also lived in the US for about 6 months. And so from my perspective of living in the US, I was amazed every time I turned on the TV that there were these ads, which is, you know, we don't have direct-to-consumer pharma ads in England. So it's always a little strange. But you were really being pummeled with ads for Yaz, which were talking about like very nebulous concepts, like it would just make you feel happier, or you would clear up your skin, and it would solve your PMS as a whole. You know, it was these really big claims. And then when I was back in England, they were also targeting women's magazines illegally, with placements of articles and recommendations and things like that in some very tricky ways. So, you know, they can't do it in the way that they can here. So I was also getting those messages there of like, this is going to make you super skinny, your skin's going to be amazing, you're going to feel better.
You're going to skip through the field, and the sunshine, rainbows, and unicorns will follow.
Yeah, and that it has none of the side effects of any of the other pills you've taken. And the real thing that it pushed on was like that you would have almost like it was like a diet drug, to be honest. It was very much about like, oh, you won't gain weight like you do with all the other pills, you'll lose weight. And so it was, yeah, as I said, my best friend was on it, my sisters were on it, everybody I knew was on it. And of course, that's going to, first of all, draw your attention. You've been sold the pill in general. I mean, I took 4 or 5 different kinds of pill before I took that one. And then you're also taking something that has been so aggressively marketed. So obviously, like from my perspective, as you say, as a journalist at the time, that was a really interesting situation. And what was also really interesting to me was that it wasn't like I made this comparison, and a friend of mine, Dr. Elizabeth Kissling, also has made this comparison before. It wasn't taken up as a feminist cause when all these things started to happen, the retraction ad campaigns, the false claims, the serious side effects, eventually the civil lawsuits, the families of women coming forward that they died from taking this birth control method. This wasn't taken up as a feminist cause in the way that, say, like toxic shock syndrome had been some years before. And so that really interested me as well, because obviously it was a product that was marketed towards just women, but it was also a product that was marketed in some really specific ways that meant that it was very quickly taken up by a lot of women. And that meant the side effects that it had, like the mental health side effects for me, were, I think, more common than perhaps we realized as well, meant that more women overall were experiencing those side effects. And then at the same time, with the growth of social media, more those women could all find each other, and so then they could tell each other their stories. And then I think that was just really a kind of watershed moment in a way for everything that I write about, had come together at the right time.
And as you talk about these mental health issues, this is something that women have complained about since the introduction of birth control, yet has been dismissed by scientists, by medical clinicians. I mean, it gets dismissed a lot. And I remember, so I wish that I would have documented all of the birth control pills that I had taken, because my body was really good at having breakthrough bleeding. So I would get switched a lot. And there was a pill that I started around 19. And I remember being so depressed that I couldn't even get out of the shower. I was just like a puddle everywhere. And this is when you had to go to the library to get on the internet, because not everybody had internet in their house. You guys, I didn't even have a computer until I was 21. So I'm just full disclosure on that. And there were these chat rooms. I think they were like Yahoo groups and these different really archaic ways of interacting. And I found the same thing. But at 19, I didn't want to hear that my birth control was the cause of my mood issues. When my doctor switched it, my mood symptoms did shift, and they did, it was like something was lifted. And so there was something to that. And I think you're 100% right that part of why this conversation is ramping up now is because of social media. And it's so much easier to connect and to find these stories than it once was on the internet. And it's my challenge to clinicians. Anytime they start dismissing these things, I'm like, well, why don't you go onto a chat room and tell the hundreds and thousands of women who have reported the same symptoms, who live in completely different parts of the world, yet their stories are consistent, that everything that they are saying is false. And we have to recognize that. How do we know what questions to ask in science to do our research? By listening to our patients and listening to the experience women are having with this medication.
Yeah, and I think for me, in the very early days, like I say, I don't have a background in medicine or science, but I was reading what was in Yaz, what was the progestin that was used, what did it do, what did potassium sparing mean? And then I got really interested in what does the pill do? What does it mean to suppress ovulation? What does it mean? And I really felt like, first of all, like you say, the experiences that I was finding online were very eerily similar to my own. It definitely wasn't generalized. There were very specific things that were similar to my own experience. But I also was making these connections, surely just common sense should lead us to think that
totally
something's going to happen if you take something like this. And I didn't make the connection because I don't know if I sort of would consciously say that I ever thought, I don't feel like I want to accept that the pill was causing it. But I think once I realized that the pill was causing it, I did have a lot of trouble coming off, because I was so psychologically attached to it. Because, I've been taking something from 17. I didn't know what my cycle would be like. I didn't know what my period would be like. I was taking it in a way that was very habitual, that really didn't. I thought that I didn't know, I thought I was really kind of worried how to manage my body without being on the pill. And so the struggle for me came after, when I discovered. I didn't just instantly go, okay, they're all going in the trash. It was a much longer journey for me, because I just sort of hit up against a lot of obstacles and challenges in terms of the fact that I've been doing something for so long, that I felt was so integral to my experience of how to be a healthy, responsible adult woman. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's when it came up for me, I think.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know that you only write a book if you can't not write the book. Like you had, like you know what's like writing a book. For people who don't know, it is a labor of love, and it is driven out of passion. Because if you are not passionate, it's a long road to be with it. What really inspired you to write Sweetening the Pill, and how did it get its name, Sweetening the Pill?
That's funny. Sweetening the pill. I literally think I was sat there thinking to myself, like, I don't have a great origin story for that. I'm not sure where it came from originally. I just think it popped into my head as like a good, somewhat well-known phrase. The
Mm-hmm.
interesting thing is that it's not well enough known phrase that that it can actually stand out as a title, because not many people do use that phrase. And then in terms of being inspired to do it, I think in the end, it really wasn't. My book's dedicated to women who experience side effects, of the pill, like me. It really just came down to the fact that when I was writing the blog, I had so many women write to me, writing paragraphs, and I still do, I still get them several times a month, paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs of their stories. Heartbreaking, horrible stories of things that they've gone through, while still hearing the narrative all the time of the pill being this liberating, fantastic savior that every woman is benefiting from and no woman is harmed by and is utterly safe. But getting all these personal stories and realizing that there was no space for those stories. There wasn't a space
Mm-hmm.
to talk about it. They didn't feel they had a space to talk about it in their personal lives. There wasn't definitely really obviously space online or in the conversation. And as I got more into it, I did actually get quite a lot of pushback early on. I wrote for Bitch magazine, which is a
Mm-hmm.
very like feminist culture magazine. And you think these people would be super savvy and very like aware and also very open-minded. And they really, like, I got a lot of pushback for the blog posts I wrote there, just to talking about the potential of, the menstrual cycle health, or
Yeah.
what it means to women's mental health to take the pill. Just talking about things in a very kind of open and sort of curious way. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
suggest I necessarily had any answers at that point. Immediately got a lot of pushback. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, so there's this group of women who are having these experiences, but they're not being allowed to voice them. There's no space to voice them. And when they are voicing them, they're often getting shut down,
Mm-hmm.
as though they're going against some kind of party line or company line or something. And there was
Yeah.
that friction there. And so in writing the book, it was really just about bringing those voices forward. So every chapter starts with one of the with permission, emails or comments or stories women had sent me, their own personal stories, and paragraphs from those. And that's really who the book was dedicated to. It was a labor of love, but it was also a very controversial book when it first came out.
Mm-hmm.
I was in a great position as a journalist, as a film journalist. I'd been working in that industry for a long while, and everybody thinks, oh, write a book and you'll take another step up in your career as a writer, and it's a great thing to do from a self-serving point of view. And actually, it really wasn't, because it wasn't received with open
Yeah.
arms. And it was, I had several really, really harsh reviews, which were more like takedowns. There were
Mm-hmm.
a lot of misreadings of the book. There were a lot of assumptions made. I had people saying online that I was funded by the Pope. Um,
The
I was
conspiracy
called a
theories
nut.
run deep.
I was called a nut job, a crank. I was called all kinds of names. There was a petition to ban the book. It was not an easy time. And
Mm-hmm.
then of course, like for me, then trying to go on from there. Thankfully, this has really become my life now, and partly out of necessity and partly just because that's when you have a book, you find it takes on a life of its own, and it really propels you in some interesting places. I would then go to job interviews and things to continue in the road that I had been on.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you get Googled and people are like, why did you write this book about the pill? Like, what's wrong with the pill? And in the US, especially, people make a lot of assumptions around that because, as I said before, there was no space for women like myself, you know, liberal feminist women to talk about this. The space had really been co-opted by the religious right, people with a religious agenda or with a political right-wing agenda, who wanted really to limit access for not generally not women-centric or women-focused reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And so lots of assumptions were made about me, and you know, it's yeah. Writing a book is hard work, but it was also not a book that you know, I would have made the choice to do for. It wasn't a career choice. It was definitely a choice because I just felt like these stories had to be heard, women had to be heard, and I just couldn't find it anywhere else. And I thought, well, you know, maybe this will help other women not experience the side effects as for if they're on the pill for as long as I had, and be able to feel the confidence to come off when they're ready.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you know what you're speaking to? I mean, it's people have to understand that as a journalist, if you want to write for magazines and their major funders are, you're writing for women's magazines, who's going to fund them? The people who are making money in the market, like the pharmaceutical industry. And so, you know, to them, it's this inconvenient truth that you've put out into the world that, you know, they may want to block you for that reason. I saw the same thing with my book that, you know, people misunderstood and nobody wanted to take me on TV. There was a full-on media blackout everywhere around it, which, you know, when I sat back with it, I'm like, I didn't write this book to be the popular kid in the room. Like, and I'm sure that you certainly didn't think that writing this book was going to make you popular or famous or anything, any of these things that people associate with books. But you write a book because you can't not put those words down and share that truth in the world. And certainly, you know, I see people will say to me, oh, wow, you know, I bet people just love your work and say all these wonderful things. But there is very much, we're seeing a shift in the conversation where people are becoming more period positive. They do want to understand their body. They do want to question birth control. But 10 years ago, 20 years ago, no, that was seen as anti-women. That, you know, if you were questioning birth control, then you were part of the agenda to take birth control away from women, which is just simply not the truth. And the reality is that, you know, why people ask me, why doesn't Planned Parenthood have this on their website? Why don't they talk about it? I'm like, Planned Parenthood has been under threat since the day they stepped on the scene. So for them, they get kind of like, they get triggered by it, where they have been under threat of being defunded over and over and over, that anything that kind of questions that, they don't want to participate in. It's a little bit of that, like that fear mentality of like, in the United States, women's bodies are constantly under threat by legislation and laws being passed by men who don't even know how our bodies work.
Yeah, and I think being an outsider to an extent, being British and not from here, I was able to view that from a vantage point that perhaps would have been not as easy if it wasn't that way. You know, the conversation is very different in the UK. So that's a lot of what I talked about in the book, is it is very much that, you know, in terms of organizations around women's health, activists around women's health are often working on the defensive because they feel that as you say, they feel like any allowance for this discussion gives more ammunition to the other side. Unfortunately, that means side effects and safety issues are really not discussed, to the detriment of women. And, you know, that it's something I've written a lot about, is it's very much a political football or political hot potato, or whatever you want to talk about, however you want to talk about it, which is why so much of my work is about, if you are in the position, and not all women are in the position, is about sort of empowering yourself with the knowledge you need in which to almost extricate yourself from that conversation in a way that you can take care of yourself, and not have to rely on the decisions of these policymakers, which go back and forth all the time. You know, I always think to myself, like during the Obama administration, there was maybe a 7-month window in which I felt like things were moving on. And then Trump became president, and I received an email, which I spoke about online, which was just another in a long line of emails from people saying, hey, are you still making this documentary? Do you think you should maybe not make this documentary because it's not a good time? Shall we just put it to one side and maybe we'll come back to it? And, maybe you think about putting it off for a few years. And you think, well, I'm sorry, but women are like literally dying because they don't have the information they need, This is not the side of it that I talk so much about in the book, but in the documentary, there's a lot of, and there's a few clips online you can find of interviews with the families of women who died. And, women are suffering severe depression. Like, no, it's not just because it's not a good time. Like, I'm sorry, when is it a good time? But I think we've heard that over and over again, and, explicitly and in other ways. It's interesting. I think the conversation has changed. I think we have a lot more insight around like this kind of medical Me Too discussion and discussion of healthcare gaslighting. We're not at a stage now like I saw previously where, if somebody was online talking about their friend who'd passed away from the stroke from their birth control, where they would get literally shouted down because they were told that, that couldn't be possible. I think now that we understand a little bit more culturally, there's a shift to that we should need to listen to women, understand, the importance of lived experiences. And I think that even like organizations like Planned Parenthood are shifting away from the idea of the dichotomy of pregnancy or pill side effects. And there was always previously, organizations like that made known quite openly their dislike of my book and the oncoming documentary. That the idea that regardless of what side effects there are, unwanted pregnancy is much worse always. And so that was always the bargaining chip, that was always the proposal. And I think even they're moving away from that, and they're acknowledging that not all hormonal birth control options are right for everybody, which is really, really great, obviously. I'm really excited to see where this conversation goes, because I do think it's changing. And I do think there's more time given to like the idea of there needing to be choices, and there needing to be more awareness of the fact that these aren't the one size fits all, or something that it doesn't come with problems.
And when Trump got voted into office, my medical clinic actually had an influx of messages from women who were super concerned about birth control and asking, should I just go get an IUD right now? Should I just do this right now? And is very reactionary. And I, had to frame like, this is a fear-based decision right now. You have very limited information. You're feeling fearful. And the thing that we found ourselves framing over and over for people was that, what the government can never take away? Your ability to predict ovulation and your knowing your body. So no matter who comes into office, if you understand fertility awareness method, you understand how this technology that we now have, and we can talk more about that, how that works, how you can know your body, no one can ever take that away. It doesn't matter who gets voted in, what parties change, none of that, because nothing can ever disempower you from knowing your own body except for the truths you choose to accept.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I remember that all coming up, and I remember it being celebrated that Planned Parenthood had 900% more interest in IUDs than, that was like a great boom, that, and I thought, oh, wow, that's incredible, because especially considering the context of, coercion and, the way that those kind of methods have, we know what can happen if they are elevated to that level to certain groups of women who are more vulnerable, who will be more than persuaded to use a method that perhaps they're not aware of all the information and issues that they should be. But yeah, I remember that happening. And I think, in the end, it's not about like, oh, we don't fight for access, or we don't, fight back against what's happening. I really think obviously all these things should be accessible. I've never come from a place of thinking that it shouldn't be a choice, that you could get the pill or an IUD whenever you want to. And I wish it was easier and less expensive. Obviously coming from the UK, that's my understanding of a for-profit healthcare system is always very critical. And I wish it was easier for women to access everything that they wanted to access. I just think that at the same time, it would be great if we were coming from a place of education and information, so that we could all, make those decisions for ourselves. But I do think, if you're in the position where you can just separate yourself from it by giving yourself that knowledge and not having to worry about, is my insurance going to cover it? Is my work insurance going to cover it? Is this president going to help us or not? It's endless, isn't it? And it's so stressful, and it's so manipulative of women, isn't it?
And I think that, with access, what we're really, we're not saying don't give women access. We're asking for access to information. They can have access to hormonal contraceptives, sure, but without having access to the information, how can this woman really make an informed decision for her body?
Yeah, and I think, the idea has always been up until now is, well, what do you need to know? Like I have something in my book where I spoke to a doctor who was like, well, why would a woman need to know anything more that she just doesn't produce eggs or something, is basically what he said.
Yeah, why do you need to know anything about your body?
No, because they don't think, and it's all geared around this real feeling of like, this feeling of having to make sure that women avoid unwanted pregnancy and unplanned pregnancy, and everything else just is inconsequential in comparison. So
well, you've already kicked off a new project called A Feminist Guide to Going Off the Pill. I'd love for you to share more about that. What is that project about and what really inspired that?
So I always had a really terrible fear of public speaking, and I was never very good at going and putting myself out to do things. I started doing a few panels and things here and there and got more comfortable. And that really evolved into, well, I'd like to take my book and sort of make it applicable in a workshop environment. And so for about the last 18 months or so, I've been putting on leading workshops, which are really around they're around the idea of like, if you're thinking about going off the pill, or you have, like, what challenges do you face beyond health orientated decisions, like beyond is your skin breaking out, or what things do you come up against that make that transition difficult for you, or might make you reconsider when you really don't want to reconsider, or might make you feel that you can't make a choice that is the better choice for you. And so I developed this curriculum around discussing in small groups with feedback and sharing stories, what we could come up against in terms of personal relationships. How many times I've heard women say, I can't come off the pill because my boyfriend doesn't think that we can prevent pregnancy without the pill, or doesn't like condoms, or
that's always the one that gets me. He doesn't like condoms. Okay, so you should take chemicals every day. Like, what is that?
It's really sad, but it's really common. And also like body disconnect. What does it mean to like have a real like mind body separation, and then be back in connection with real having a real period? What does that mean? We talk about feminism, because I was getting a lot of feedback from women saying, I want to come off the pill, but I feel like a bad feminist for coming off the pill. Like, I feel like I'm ungrateful, or I feel, part of that is also your relationship with your mother often, because often it's our mothers who are involved in the first time we go on the pill. And, their concept is going to be wrapped in their coming of age story. And ours might be quite different. And so we look at all these different kind of social integrations, and like the people that you'll talk to, the people who will have opinions, because we all know whenever it comes to women's fertility, whether it's pregnancy or birth control, people have opinions and think that they're allowed to give them to you. And so looking at it from that place, because that was my experience when I came off the pill, I didn't have a lot of withdrawal, what I call withdrawal issues. I had a few months of having some insomnia and anxiety, and I had some post-pill acne for sure. But for the most part, after about 3 months, it was an incredibly positive experience. It was really quite almost immediately a very positive experience for me. And I just felt so much more awake and alive and connected. I physically felt better. My mind cleared. I could like write again. I felt more creative. I felt all these things. A lot of it was very, very positive for me. But that doesn't mean that I didn't keep one of those pill packets in my cosmetics case for so long, because it just always seemed a little easier because of everything I was coming up against in life that you deal with, right? That isn't necessarily to do with how it bodily feels to you, but it's what you're coming up against. And so I really wanted to create that. So then A Feminist Guide to Going Off the Pill was that, is an extension of that I wanted to bring it to online. And I tested it out earlier this year. I want to make it something later on this year that's evergreen available, that is really just looking at that kind of a going off the pill workshop that talks about those challenges, works through them, provides suggestions, resources, kind of when I was writing my blog, I started my blog with research from one article. I then came off the pill after about 2 weeks of writing the blog, and it became about going off the pill. And I did all of this, that journey for me of piecing these things together was obviously, helped me come off the pill, helped me have the confidence to stay off the pill. But it was actually also a feminist awakening for me. I'd gone to an all-girls school. I went to an all-girls college for a year, not the whole time. And I would never have called myself a feminist. I was 26 and I didn't feel like that was an identity that I associated with, or a political cause that I associated with. And all this research actually was a real catalyst for me in that way as well. And so I wanted to sort of recreate that for other women, so that as well, if I feel like if you come off the pill and you don't feel supported in your community, it can be very difficult. I think that support's very important. But I think feeling connected to some bigger kind of movement is really helpful as well. And I do kind of have this feeling that like coming off the pill can be about so much more. Even though your health is really important, it can be about even more than your health. We need to be healthy. We need to be healthy to be engaged in our socially, in our community, politically. But I think it can be about more than that. It can be about our collective experience, because being on the pill or being on hormonal birth control is like, as you mentioned just earlier on, is a collective experience of so many women. That's something that connects us. And I think coming off and the positive changes that can come with that can be really awakening for a lot of people. So I just wanted to offer that conversation as an opportunity for women to kind of connect with others, but also feel like, okay, this could be something bigger than just what's happening to me. And I think that's something really just to recreate what the experience was for me and the women who've got in touch with me over the years and read my book and felt similarly, and then often gone on to do some really amazing things like become health coaches or start their own fertility awareness education circles or create non-profits and things like that. I think there's so much in there that can be really inspiring.
And where can women find your book and you on the internet?
Yeah, well, sweeteningthepill.com has everything, including click through, buy the book, really nice research resource guide page of all recommended books. Your book's on there.
Oh, thanks.
And also some online stuff that you can watch and all kinds of things. So if you go to sweeteningthepill.com, everything is on there, and you can contact me through there as well. And my social media is linked through there, so Twitter and all those good things as well.
Fantastic. And as we close today's conversation, for women who are listening, who are on birth control, thinking about coming off, maybe feeling fearful around that, is there anything that you would want them to know or you'd want to share with them?
I think to not feel that you need anybody's permission. If you're on the pill, especially, you can choose to come off when you feel it's right for you. Just make sure you have a game plan in place. I think a lot of women feel that they need to get permission from their doctor, and I think unless you have a health issue, that means that you need to do that. If you're just using it for contraception and you feel confident in that it could make a difference for you, give it a try. Have a break. What started this for me was a 2-week break. I took a 2-week break. The shift was so significant that I was like, I really thought deeply about continuing to use it. I then went back on. I carried on for about 6 months, and then I came off. For many women, the only way that they're going to know if it's having an impact on them is if they stop taking it. And that's, I don't think all women have as extreme experiences as I did, and sometimes it's just coming off it and going, I do feel a lot better. And you need to just have the confidence to know that you don't need to have permission to do that. You can do that. Just make sure you have a game plan, and see how you feel. And it's really that simple. And don't feel like, you can always go back on. It's always going to be there for you. But sometimes that few weeks break, like it was for me, just is so eye-opening that it makes you really want to make a change overall.
Well, so well said. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing in this world. And for everybody listening, we will have links to the book, Sweetening the Pill, and also to sweeteningthepill.com. So you can find those below. And I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. This was a great conversation. I know it's going to help support a lot of women.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I'm glad to be able to do it.